Hey, Allison Verhalen here, coming at you live for today's. I should really come up with a name for this. I don't know if tip of the week is right because that makes it sound like it's going to be short. And if you've been seeing any of these, they're not short. I tend to go fairly in depth into whatever topic I'm covering. So I'm gonna have to think about that and go ahead and put that in the comments or shoot me an email if you think of a good name for this. Um, Anywho, this SEO update is what it is today. I'm going to be talking about not today's, but the most recent Google core algorithm update. You may have heard about it. Google releases a core update. A core update, if you're not familiar, is like a big update to their algorithm, right? They're always kind of tweaking their algorithm, trying to make it better. But once every 3 to 4 months or so, they release a core algorithm update, and they do a big update and they let us know about it beforehand and they roll it out usually over 2 weeks. So this past one, they announced they were rolling it out on August 25th. And then on September 9th, they said, okay, we're done. So it actually took a little bit more than 2 weeks. It took 15 days, which is, again, unusual. So let's talk about what this means, this helpful content update. So the idea, and again, if you've seen any of my videos or my blog posts or anything, you know this already, that I am always all for creating helpful content because you can do all the things to try and appeal to Google's algorithm so you show up on the first page, but that's not an end goal, right? If that is your end goal, then you get bragging rights and you don't actually have sales to show for it. So that's a step in the journey to the end goal, which is actually getting people to buy your product or service, right? Or schedule a call with you or whatever it is you want them to do next. Showing up on the first page of Google is just the first step in that process. And even if you have a fairly short buyer journey, it's still not the end of the process, right? They still have to click through, read what you're all about, decide that they like what you're all about, and then pay you. So I'm all for creating high quality content that actually answers the questions people come to you for, which is not to say that it can't be salesy. It can absolutely be salesy. People can look up SEO strategist, for example, and look for what makes a good SEO strategist, or what is SEO strategy, or how much is this going to cost. You see a lot of those where people are searching by best or near me or by price. Those show up in a lot of keywords because that's what people are looking for. So you can absolutely have those that helpful content on a sales page. It should be helpful on their sales page to help them understand why they should buy from you. So always keep that in mind, that you need to be creating helpful content. That said, I did see something where someone talked about, I think their website had pages with, I think it was job descriptions, and salary information and that kind of thing, which Google might not find particularly helpful just because it's very thin content, right? There tends to not be a whole lot there, but you still need to have that content on your website, right? But maybe you don't need it to rank on the first page of Google. Maybe you can put a no index tag on there. And so when other people are exploring your site, they will find their way to that page if that's something they are looking for, rather than worrying about that page showing up on the first page of Google. I'm getting ahead of myself. I am going to back up a little bit and talk about how Google's helpful content update aims to affect rankings, right? So we want content that is actually helpful to the user to show up in searches. I've actually been saying this for a while, that this has always been Google's goal. I do wish Google were a little more transparent. Of course, don't we all wish Google were more transparent, right? But it is something that Google has been working on for a while, where they do want rich, in-depth, helpful content to show up on searches. They don't want content with a ton of backlinks or keywords. Any of those spammy tactics, Google is starting to catch on to, and doesn't like it. So it just wants content that really answers people's questions. That said, we've kind of already seen this trend for a while. So Google's latest update, much to our surprise, really did not have much of an effect on traffic. Normally, when these core algorithms roll out, people see huge ups and downs in their traffic, spikes and dips and spikes again. And it's kind of all over the place and they don't know what's happening and their search rankings are all over the place. That really did not happen this time around, which is weird. But then Google pointed out that it's really not that weird because Google has always aimed to point people in the direction of content that is actually going to help them. So if people were already ranking on the first page of Google a lot that were not creating helpful content, Google pointed out that would point to a bigger problem. So Google's like, of course it didn't have that big of an effect. At least not that we saw on individual websites. That said, Google has also said that it is not done not that it's not done with this rollout, like this big core update to the algorithm, this is done rolling out, but Google will continue to test and tweak and see what works and what doesn't as it relates to helpful content. So keep that in mind that we're not out of the woods yet necessarily. So if you have been flagged, actually, something else I want to say about this is something that Google said is some sites, like I just mentioned, that one site, which probably has a ton of helpful content, but they also have like job descriptions, which probably has fairly thin content. So, but you still need it on there. So Google has said, for the most part, that even helpful content on website could get downgraded in the rankings if there's a ton of unhelpful content on that same website. But some helpful content could still rank highly, even if there is some unhelpful content elsewhere on the website. They didn't give an exact ratio as to like how much helpful versus unhelpful content you can get away with. Again, I always recommend having tons of helpful content. If you need a few pages of unhelpful content because they're just up there to give a little bit of information about something specific, that's fine. That makes sense. But again, this is where your blogging comes in because your blog should have a ton of helpful content for your users. So keep that in mind. It's also worth noting that helpful content is just one factor that Google looks at to determine whether or not your content is worthy of showing up on the first page, right? It's still taking into account keywords and kind of taking into account length. I'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, backlinks are still a big thing when it comes to Google if they are quality backlinks and you use them well. So how long does it take to recover after you've been flagged? So let's say you are one of the, 3 websites that actually did see a hit, or maybe, like I said, maybe Google is going to continue to refine this and maybe some sites will take a hit eventually. They just haven't seen that in their traffic yet. So, this takes months, right? Essentially, and I've talked about this before with other core algorithm updates, is that it takes months. Basically, it takes until the next core algorithm update for you to really convince Google that you're a stand-up website with helpful content that people need and that it's relevant to certain searches people are doing. Google's bots are constantly crawling the internet, looking for new content, updates to existing websites, and the algorithm wants to make sure it does not see unhelpful content reappear before it's going to restore your rankings. So they know that people are tricky. People might delete unhelpful content, get it off their website while the algorithm is rolling out, while the update is rolling out, and then a little bit later, maybe they'll put it back up on their website for whatever reason. So Google wants to make sure it's not seeing that happen. So that's part of the reason why it could take so long for you to recover if you do get flagged. And then, like I said, no index tags is one option. If you have unhelpful content that you really need to have on your website, but maybe you don't need it to show up in online searches. Maybe it's something you just need to have somewhere on your website that people can find once they're already there, especially if they're looking for something specific. Then go ahead and put a no index tag on there. That will prevent Google's algorithm from crawling and indexing that piece of content. So that's a nice workaround, I think. So I did not see a response from Google saying whether or not this would work. But it makes sense that it would work. So maybe, again, if you're one of those few websites that has some unhelpful content on your website, maybe give it a try and see if that makes a difference. I would also like to know what this means for AI generated content. I've already given my opinion on AI writing software. I'm not a fan of it. It's not unique. It's not engaging. It's just not good. Google has not said anything about how this update will affect AI generated content. Obviously, I'm all for downgrading AI generated content, at least for now. I mean, the robots might get better at creating content. I don't know. I just don't see it being possible right now, where the technology is right now, for AI generated content to be really helpful. On the other hand, Google is using AI technology to detect, helpful content versus unhelpful content. So would it be hypocritical of them to downgrade AI generated content? Is AI capable of recognizing other AI? Are we going to see the AI team up and refuse to downgrade AI generated content because they feel a solidarity with their fellow robot? Or have I just been reading too much science fiction? Anywho, who was impacted by the helpful content update? Like I said, we did not really see much traffic volatility with this. Google has denied targeting specific industries. They always say that. It did say that some types of content that were most likely to be heavily affected were online educational materials, arts and entertainment, shopping, and tech-related content. This is because they have seen a lot of content in those areas that basically just aggregates content from other sources online and puts it all together in a post and goes, look, this is a unique post. And Google goes, no, that's not unique. You're not adding anything to the conversation here. You're not putting anything up here that people could not find somewhere else. So that's what was targeted, according to Google. Not according to Google. So I don't know if that really happened. Again, no one really saw like huge volatility in their traffic. So whether or not this worked is yet to be seen. And again, this is something that could be we might see more of a difference being made in this later on as Google continues to implement changes. I should also back up a bit and say that Google said that it was implementing these changes first and foremost to English language websites. It will then roll out to other language websites. So if for some reason you have a website that is in a language other than English, it might take a while before you see these same updates, if you see any at all, because like I said, we haven't really seen anything other than what Google is telling us. We're mostly just theorizing at this point. So while Google is being typically tight-lipped, as usual, about what exactly it considers to be helpful versus unhelpful content, they did provide a list of questions you should ask yourself before publishing or even writing a piece of content. Questions include things like, is the content primarily to attract people from search engines rather than made for humans? Are you producing lots of content on different topics in the hopes that some of it might perform well in search results? Are you using extensive automation to produce content on many topics? So that's kind of answering our AI question. Are you mainly summarizing what others have to say without adding much value? Are you writing about things just because they seem trending, not because you'd write about them otherwise for your existing audience? This is something I struggled with a lot because I actually had people in my audience ask me to do a webinar on something, but it's not something that I do. And it's not a service. It's not a service I provide. It's not based on a service I provide. It's not based on a service I want to provide, right? So it's not like, yeah, let's try this. It's like, no, this is just not for me. So that's an example of, I could absolutely do some keyword research and find something that's going to rank really well for that, but it's just not in alignment with my business. Does your content leave readers feeling like they need to search again to get better information from other sources? This is where Google keeps track of that, the long click where they don't come back, or if they bounce. If they go to your website and maybe explore it a little bit and then they click back and they're clicking through other links to find what they're looking for. And again, this is why I always recommend those really long, in-depth blog posts, is so that you are answering all of the questions related to a topic. That said, you should not write. This is one of the questions Google says you should ask yourself. Are you writing to a particular word count because you've heard or read that Google has a preferred word count? And then in parentheses, Google says, no, we don't. There is no preferred word count. You heard it from the horse's mouth. You don't have to try and reach an arbitrary word count. That said, there is definitely a preference towards longer content, as long as it's all valuable content. Don't try to reach a certain word count just for the sake of reaching that arbitrary word count. Write the long, in-depth blog post because you're covering a heavy topic that has a lot of information to cover. So that is it. That is everything that I have for you today about this latest core algorithm update. Again, they have said that they will be continuing to implement it in other core algorithm updates, in smaller updates to their algorithm along the way. So just keep that in mind. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. I'm always at AV, as in my initials, super easy to remember, Allison Verhalen. It is avwritingservices.com, and you can message me directly at info@avwritingservices.com. That's it for me. Have a great week and happy blogging, everyone.